She didn't ask. She billed. That's not family. That's fraud in cursive. The envelope was thick, one of those self-important cream-colored things that rustle like they have secrets. It arrived on a Monday morning, tucked neatly between a utilities bill and a coupon flyer, addressed in calligraphy that had been trained, not felt. Dr. Sybil M. Hollingsworth. Not mom. Not mother. Just the academic title and the surname. Like I was being summoned to a conference, not notified of my own exclusion. I carried it to the kitchen without opening it, placed it next to my tea kettle like it might steep truth if left long enough. I already knew who it was from. Only Lavinia signs her envelopes like she's auditioning for a trust fund. I set the kettle to boil. 3 minutes, not a second more. The only thing in my life I still time precisely. And then I opened it. Inside, a tri-folded ivory letterhead with gilded trim, a soft blush border, and the sort of over-designed serif font that screams money louder than class. There was no invitation. There was, however, an invoice. Invoice 184-LM/wedding gift contribution. Venue, Marquis Estate and Conservatory. $24,000. Floral installations, peony sculpture, seasonal arches. $9,200. Catered tasting menu. 7 courses. $13,800. Couture bridal gown, custom silk overlay. $6,000. Live string ensemble, imported. $8,000. Drone videography, edit and luxury album. $7,500. Honeymoon flights, Maldives. $15,500 total. $84,000 memo. Your presence isn't required, but your generosity would mean the world. A meaningful gift, from mother to daughter. Signed, in fountain pen blue, Lavinia Margot Chanot Hollingsworth. I stared at it, wondering briefly if this was performance art. Not a call, not a conversation. Just a formalized request for funding the fantasy I wasn't invited to witness. She didn't even pretend. Just inked it in the memo line like a curse written in cursive, gift. My kettle screamed, and I let it. I poured my tea, no sugar, no honey, and folded the invoice back into its envelope like one might fold a verdict. I did not cry. I do not cry for things I can name, and I could name this easily. Extortion with etiquette. It's a peculiar thing, watching your only child reinvent motherhood as a financial transaction. You'd think she was adopted by a hedge fund. 27 years of raising her, through spelling bees, allergic reactions, and a brief obsession with becoming a dolphin trainer. And this was how she chose to speak to me now, in itemized line items and passive-aggressive floral print. I held the envelope up to the window light. It cast a faint golden glow on my palm, like it was trying to disguise its violence with shine. I let it fall to the table, and I sat, and I remembered. The last time I saw Lavinia in person was 2 Christmases ago. She arrived 43 minutes late, wearing heels that looked more suited to litigation than dinner, and brought a vegan pecan tart no one asked for. She'd spent the meal comparing Manhattan penthouses to cultural deserts like Connecticut, mentioned her therapist 3 times, and used the phrase generational trauma as if it were a seasoning. When I'd offered her seconds, she looked at my serving dish and said, "Oh, you still use that pattern." As if I'd failed to modernize the porcelain like I'd failed to modernize myself. Now 2 years later, she'd mailed me a bill. Not to invite me, not to apologize, just to instruct me where to send my money. It didn't hurt, not the way people think. Number it clarified, the way acid clarifies metal, the way silence clarifies motive. I sipped my tea. It tasted sharp, clean. And then I smiled. Not the warm kind, the noted and filed kind. If she wanted a gift, I'd give her one. Just not the one she imagined. She stripped the name Mom the way she stripped the truth, quietly and for convenience. The longer I looked at the envelope, the more I realized. It wasn't the invoice that stung. It was the name on the front, Ms. S. M. Hollingsworth. No mother, no mom, not even a casual ma, which Lavinia had used well into grad school, usually while needing something notarized. Just the formal, neutral, antiseptic address. As if I were an attorney she hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't even include a first name, just my initials, like I was a corporate sponsor for a gala she hoped I wouldn't attend. I stared at it for a while, longer than I should have. Then I stood, walked to the small secretary desk near the window, and opened the bottom drawer. That's where I kept the older envelopes. Letters from her elementary school, a postcard from Spain, when she was 19 and learning that sangria was stronger than it looked. College tuition receipts, all in my name. All addressed to Mom. I ran my finger across the edge of the newest envelope. Ms. S.M. Hollingsworth, stripped of role, reduced to function, sanitized for distance. In semiotics, which I once taught to people who now probably manage hedge funds, we called it a referential shift, a deliberate relabeling of a symbol to change the power it holds. Lavinia wasn't just sending me a bill. She was reframing me. Not a parent, a payment processor, an account she expected to stay active, but not present. I sat down at my writing desk, the one Richard bought me on our 15th anniversary. Mahogany, 3 drawers, never a splinter out of place. I pulled out a clean sheet of paper, thick, matte, crisp, and I wrote the name exactly as she'd addressed it, Ms. S.M. Hollingsworth. Then underneath, in smaller script, formerly known as Mom, revoked by sender without notice or ceremony. It occurred to me then that Lavinia had always been rehearsing for this. The slow migration from intimacy to administration. Mother became her. Honey became Mother. Then Mother became Ms. Hollingsworth. Each shift quiet, convenient, always accompanied by a request, a check, a signature, a quick favor. I used to think it was just adulthood reshaping her vocabulary. Now I saw it for what it was. A strategy of distance wrapped in polite grammar. The last real conversation we'd had, not logistics, not schedules, but real, was probably 3 years ago. She'd called late. Too late. Said she was reevaluating the emotional architecture of our relationship. I asked if that meant she wanted to stop calling. She said, no. Just that I'll be calling differently. She never clarified what that meant. Turns out, it meant invoices. There's a peculiar grief that comes not from loss, but from reclassification. When your name is removed from the active list of someone's affections, but your wallet remains listed under recurring contributor. That night, I took out a black fountain pen, the one Richard always used for letters of condolence, and began drafting my reply. It wasn't a letter. It was a ledger, not of money, but of moments. The emergency dentist appointment at 3 a.m. The 9th grade project we finished together at the kitchen table after her partner dropped out. The silent nights during her divorce, when she didn't want to talk, only to know I was nearby. Things I'd never billed her for. Because love, unlike invoices, isn't transferable. And yet here we were. A mother rebranded. A daughter in deficit. And $84,000 worth of nerve sealed in ivory stock. I folded the envelope once more, slid it back into its original sheath, and placed it in the top drawer, next to her childhood drawings. Let the symbolism sit together a while. One belonged to a child who used to draw me holding her hand. The other? To a woman who now saw me as a line item. The estate was called Chateau Violet, a name that suggested France, whispered old money, and was, in fact, in upstate New York, 20 miles past a defunct outlet mall. I typed it into the search bar with the sort of quiet resolve usually reserved for obituaries and subpoenas. The website greeted me with a string quartet embedded in the homepage. Bach, I think, playing gently under images of brides spinning through marble archways and grooms holding vintage pocket watches like props in a period drama. There was a butler in white gloves, a horse-drawn carriage, and enough imported roses to stage a royal funeral. Excess, not elegance. Aesthetic without intimacy. The kind of place where people take pictures to remember how expensive something felt, not how loved they were when it happened. I clicked through the tabs. Every detail had a price tag. Every romantic moment was an upsell. Champagne Tower reception, $4,500, private dove release, $1,200, subject to weather. Custom pedal cannon entrance, $3,800. A Canon. For petals. I stared at that one for a long time. Lavinia had once refused to wear polyester because it felt performative. Now she was launching petals at herself like she'd declared war on subtlety. The photos of the bridal suite showed a gilded chaise lounge and a freestanding clawfoot tub, facing floor-to-ceiling windows, sycamore trees, a reflection pond, a guest book crafted from hand-pressed linen paper and bound in leather with the couple's initials monogrammed in rose gold foil. L+G, Lavinia and Gregory. Gregory, whose defining qualities thus far were expensive socks, a gym smile, and the vocabulary of a man who'd never had to explain himself. I'd met him once. He'd greeted me with a handshake, referred to me as Dr. Mom, and explained how Bitcoin had taught him the value of resilience. Chateau Virelais had capacity for 250 guests, optional opera quartets, and a Vows Under the Stars terrace package. It also required a minimum spend of $75,000 for weekend events, which explained the invoice, which explained everything. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands, the way I used to when a student said something particularly arrogant in a seminar, and I was giving them time to realize it. Lavinia didn't want a wedding. She wanted a stage. She wasn't pledging love. She was announcing status, and I'd been cast as the silent benefactor seated out of frame. Richard would have hated it. He'd proposed in a diner, gave me a ring that took 2 paychecks and a bit of borrowed courage. We eloped on a Thursday and ate grilled cheese in our wedding clothes while the courthouse clerk told us we were the most prepared couple he'd ever seen. He called it our best negotiation. Lavinia's idea of sacred seemed to involve Swarovski-accented centerpieces and a drone flyover of her entrance. I closed the laptop. A wedding, in its truest form, is a private covenant made public. But Lavinia? She wanted pageantry, applause, a kingdom in white chiffon, and she wanted me to fund the coronation without attending the crowning. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at my garden, sparse now in October, but still honest. A few stubborn marigolds, the ghost of lavender, soil that had known work. There was no orchestra, no carriage, but there had been laughter here once. Real, unstaged, unbilled. A wedding should be a vow, not a performance. Lavinia wanted a coronation. And I was about to crown her with consequence. The office was scented like privilege, bergamot, sandalwood, and a note of panic masked in potpourri. I arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, wearing a charcoal coat I hadn't taken out since Richard's funeral, and a silk scarf with a pattern subtle enough to suggest I'd never needed to raise my voice in a boardroom. The receptionist smiled too brightly, the kind that creases before sincerity catches up. "Do you have an appointment?" I slid the card across the desk. Christine Bellamy, head planner, White Ribbon Events. She looked down, read the name, looked up again. "Of course, Ms. Hollingsworth. Right this way." Ms. again. They were getting very good at not calling me mother. Christine's office had cream-colored chairs and a vase full of calla lilies trembling under central air. She extended a hand, long nails frosted pink, a practiced warmth. "It's so lovely to finally meet you, Miss Hollingsworth. Your daughter speaks of you often. She mentioned your generosity." I raised one eyebrow. Gently, precisely. She must have spoken softly. I can't recall any recent conversation. Christine paused. She was good, not flawless, but good. "Well, she said you'd be handling most of the larger contributions. I have the file right here if you'd like to go over it." "I would." She smiled wider, reaching into a folder so polished I could see my reflection in the corner. The file was thick, stapled receipts, vendor quotes, wire instructions, and handwritten notes in lavender ink. Christine gestured toward the first page. "Venue secured, floral design approved, catering in progress. The dress deposit's been paid, and the videography is still pending. But Lavinia mentioned she expected to finalize with your support." She paused delicately, folding her hands. "Of course, we can itemize anything you'd like." I took a long look at the ledger before me. It read like a ransom note for common sense. $9,200 for an interactive floral experience. $7,800 for a harpist flown in from Vienna. And a $4,000 emotional guest concierge, which, as it turned out, was just a woman paid to hand tissues and affirm feelings. Christine studied me, as planners do, trying to decode the expression of a woman deciding whether to fund a dream or burn it down. "I'm terribly sorry," she added quickly. "Should I be calling you Dr. Hollingsworth?" "No," I said, folding the page shut. "Call me Sybil." The shift registered immediately. Her smile stiffened. "Oh, of course. Sorry, I just assumed. Most people do." I placed the file back on her desk like it was evidence. "I'm not here to contribute. I'm here to calculate damages." Christine blinked once, twice, like a woman waiting for a punchline and slowly realizing it isn't coming. I don't understand." "No, but you will." I reached into my handbag and retrieved the envelope Lavinia had sent. The one labeled "gift" in the memo line like a dagger dipped in honey. Christine read it, her eyes scanning with increasing horror. "She sent you an invoice? Number." She sent me a forecast for failure, dressed as entitlement. Christine placed the envelope down with care, the way one might lower a bomb after realizing it's ticking. Sorry, Sybil, I didn't know." Lavinia said, "I know what she said. I know what she didn't say. I know the difference." There's a certain kind of silence that only occurs when money meets morality. Christine had arrived at it. I stood slowly, smoothing my coat sleeve. "She told you I'd pay, and you believed her. That's not your fault. People like Lavinia trade on confidence the way others trade on cash, until the bill comes due." I walked to the door, then paused. "When she calls, and she will, tell her I was here. Tell her I read the line items. Tell her I declined the coronation." Christine swallowed. "And what should I tell the vendors?" I smiled faintly, hand on the doorframe. "Tell them to hold the doves. The queen won't be arriving." The floral shop was tucked between a consignment bookstore and a tailor who hadn't updated his signage since Carter was in office. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old decisions, which is to say, expensive. Fenwick and Daughters. The name had been on the wedding file Christine slid across her desk, scrawled in Lavinia's cursive like a declaration. "Final vendor. No substitutions." I walked in wearing slate wool and silence, both tailored. The woman behind the counter was arranging dahlias into a spiraled bouquet so complex it looked like it could win a chess match. She looked up, blinked behind tortoiseshell glasses, and gave a slow, assessing nod. "I don't do walk-ins on Fridays." "I'm not here for petals," I replied, calm as polished glass. "I'm here for history." She paused. "You must be Lavinia's mother." "I was," I said. "Now I'm her invoice." She gave a short laugh, not cruel but clean, the kind that said she'd met my daughter and survived. She extended a hand. "Myra Fenwick, owner, designer, therapist by necessity. Sybil Hollingsworth, former contributor, current problem." That made her laugh harder, a crack in the professional armor. "I assume this isn't a friendly reconnection." "Number, but I believe we may have common ground." "Does that ground involve 27 imported peony stems in December, paired with Icelandic ranunculus and gold-flaked roses?" I lifted a brow. "She requested all that?" "She demanded it, then pouted when I reminded her it's not a good season for peonies unless you're sourcing them from Chile and bribing customs." "And what did you suggest?" She smiled without warmth. "I suggested therapy instead." I liked her instantly, not because she was clever, but because she had the weary posture of a woman who had been paid to endure beauty and had discovered most of it wasn't. We sat at a small round table in the back, past the hydrangeas and metaphor. Myra poured chamomile from a chipped pot. "You're the one who's supposed to pay for it all, right? That's the narrative. And she didn't invite you? Not even a postage stamp of courtesy." "Wow," she sipped. "And she thought you'd just write a check?" She didn't think. She calculated. Myra leaned back in her chair sighing. "I've been in this business for 22 years. I've done flowers for weddings, funerals, and the occasional divorce party. But your daughter? She's the first client I've ever seen who treated the tasting like a hostile negotiation. What happened? She asked if I could design a bouquet that photographs like wealth but smells like restraint. Then called my assistant disposable because she sneezed near the eucalyptus. I blinked. Did you fire her? Number I finished the meeting, then raised the price by 20%. Elegant, she shrugged. Sometimes the only language entitlement understands is markup. I handed her the folder Christine had given me, the full vendor file. She flipped through it slowly, eyes narrowing. She really assumed you'd bankroll all of this. She did. And that you wouldn't notice? She's mistaken on both counts. Myra nodded. I'm guessing you want to know what happens if you don't pay. I already know that part. I want to know if you're the kind of woman who enjoys watching a stage collapse when the spotlight flickers. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled a photo from the folder, a centerpiece sketch involving hanging vines and floating glass bowls filled with single blooms. That one? She said it looked too floral. I assume you resisted the urge to show her dirt. She grinned. I didn't. I gave her a literal box of soil and told her that's where beauty begins. She called it aggressively rustic. I stood, folding my gloves neatly. Myra, if the time comes, and it will, you'll receive a call. Lavinia will panic. She'll beg. She'll name drop. And you want me to? Let her feel the absence she designed. She walked me to the door. You're not like the other mothers, she said. No, I said quietly. I'm not a mother anymore. I'm a lesson. The thing about guest lists, the real ones, not the calligraphed cover sheets, is that they always leak. People talk, cousins post, florists gossip, and in the age of shared spreadsheets and shared egos, you can count on at least one intern to confuse read-only with reply-all. I wasn't looking for it, truly. I was in the middle of alphabetizing my spice drawer, a twice-yearly ritual that doubles as controlled meditation, when an email landed. Subject line: dress code clarification, Chateau Virelais ceremony. It was from someone named Carrie B., a former co-worker of Lavinia's who once borrowed my scarf at a PTA meeting and never returned it. She'd hit reply all 181 of them. It was, in effect, the wedding guest list, grouped by category: family, bloodline plus step, bride's friends, work, school, yoga, other, groom's guests, approved, VIP seating, inner circle. I scrolled slowly like a woman unwrapping her own autopsy. There was Aunt Norma, of course, the one who once set a gravy boat on fire because she mistook the sterno flame for ambiance and refused to admit it, even as we evacuated the dining room. Then there was Danielle, Lavinia's middle school piano teacher, who once told her she had stage fright fingers. Kyle, the barista who used to write goddess energy on her oat milk lattes. Cynthia, her former roommate who accidentally fed my daughter edibles the night before the LSAT. Even Tabitha, a family friend who once gave Lavinia lice at summer camp and is now, evidently, a welcome guest at the ceremonial binding of souls. But not me. Not the woman who packed her lunch for 11 straight years, who sat through orthodontist appointments and feigned interest in teenage poetry, who helped her draft her first college essay and didn't say a word when she swapped the closing paragraph with ChatGPT last minute for polish. 181 invitations, one envelope conspicuously missing. Mine. I made tea, not because I needed it, but because it felt improper to process betrayal without a hot beverage. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the guest list on my phone, watching the digital proof of erasure scroll past in alphabetical order. She hadn't forgotten me. She'd deleted me. That's the thing about erasure. It's never passive. It's curated. I opened my notes app and created a new entry. Catherine Lavinia Hollingsworth Grant, Wedding Manifest. Invited the Pilates instructor. Invited the third cousin who spells dessert with one S. Invited the man who once sold us a faulty vacuum. Did not invite the woman who gave her life and grammar. Later that day, I ran into Joan Whitmore, my cousin by marriage and eternal gossip vector. She wore too much perfume and too few boundaries, which on this particular day worked in my favor. "Oh, Sybil, darling," she said, air kissing my cheek. "Isn't it just divine? Lavinia's wedding at the Violet. I mean, real roses, imported linens, private harpist. It's practically operatic," I smiled. "I heard there's even a Dove release." She clutched her pearls. "Oh, and did you see the invite insert? She's requested everyone wear off-white, said it's about purity of tone. Can you imagine?" I nodded slowly. Tell me, when did yours arrive?" "Oh, weeks ago. Hand-delivered. She had someone bring it by on a Vespa." Of course she did. "And yours?" Joan asked, tilting her head. "Must have been extra lovely." I sipped my tea. Mine got lost in the metaphor. That night I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out an old photo. Lavinia, age 9, in a dress with pockets and grass stains. Laughing, arms around my waist. I placed it face down. There are some things even a grandmaster retires from. The caterer called me ma'am before I even said a word, which is always a sign something's gone sideways, or is about to. "Is this Mrs. Hollingsworth?" "Doctor," I said gently, "but Sybil is fine, and you are." "Nathan Renly, head of culinary coordination for Plate and Palette. We're, honored to be catering your daughter's wedding." Ah, so that's the script Lavinia had circulated. I let the silence bloom for exactly 2 seconds too long. He continued. "I just wanted to confirm the remaining balance on the contract. We received partial deposit, but the final invoice is due next week." "And how much?" I asked. "Is the outstanding figure?" He cleared his throat once, then again. $22,475. "Dollars?" "Yes, ma'am." "Sybil," I corrected. "Yes, Sybil. Apologies. Lavinia indicated you would be generously covering it, if you, value family." There it was, the checkmate move, deployed before the game had even started. Guilt, lacquered in suggestion. Family, dangled like bait. A mother's love, expressed in wire transfers and veal cutlets. I stood at my kitchen window looking out at my garden. The rosemary was dry. The roses were honest. "Did she tell you I wouldn't be attending the wedding?" I asked. "She mentioned travel conflict." "She mentioned my absence but ensured you had my number?" "Well, yes." "How clever of her." He sounded young, 35 at most, and entirely too sincere for the machinery he'd been dragged into. "Nathan," I said, "let me ask you something candidly." "Yes?" "If your mother refused to buy you a sports car, would you send her a bill for gas and insurance anyway?" He gave a soft, nervous laugh. "No, ma'am. Sybil, I suppose not." "Then I'm afraid we're at an impasse." I hung up gently, then made a list. Vendors, outstanding. Caterer, unpaid. Linens, pending. Venue, likely frantic. Florals, awkward but aware. The linens company answered on the second ring. A woman named Teresa spoke with the urgent cheerfulness of someone who knows the payment clock is ticking, and the bride has already chosen the Rothschild platinum-threaded heirloom set. "Yes, Ms. Hollingsworth, we have you listed as the client of record. Congratulations on the big day." I let the sentence sit there, cold and unattended. "No congratulations necessary," I said. "I won't be attending." "Oh, I see. Well, the invoice is not mine. But Lavinia is welcome to cover her own extravagance." There was a pause, then a whisper of a sigh, the kind that meant this was not the first bridal fantasy to crumble under fiscal gravity. After that, I called the harpist, the string quartet, the tent rental company, which offered climate-controlled glass marquees with ballroom acoustics and Instagram appeal. All told the same story: deposits made, balances due, and my name floating quietly at the base of the assumption. I was the ghost donor, the invisible investor, the woman whose absence was scheduled but whose account was presumed active. Lavinia hadn't asked. She'd asserted. She hadn't discussed. She'd assigned. And somehow she'd made blood, that oldest, messiest thing, sound like a financing plan. She weaponized bloodline like a credit card. That night I opened my ledger. Not a real one. just a clean notebook I used when I needed to sort my mind with bullet points and black ink. I made 2 columns. Things Lavinia asked for. $84,000. Complete silence. Social absence. Financial presence. Linens. She couldn't pronounce. Things Lavinia earned. Debt. Delay. Doves in cages. A mother with memory and motive. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I wasn't after revenge. I was after accuracy. And the guest list, the linens, the caterer, they were all beginning to feel like footnotes in an essay she forgot I could still revise. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a string instrument when the bow stops short, unresolved, hanging like breath withheld. That's the silence I began with. The violinist's number was buried 3 lines down in the vendor spreadsheet Christine had folded into a cream folder. The same color as the envelope Lavinia used to send me an $84,000 invoice labeled gift. I dialed precisely at 10:03 a.m. because no self-respecting artist picks up at 9, and calling too late makes you sound desperate. A man answered, voice low, textured, the kind of voice that usually charges by the hour. Elias speaking. Mr. Elias Vargo? Yes. This is Dr. Sybil Hollingsworth. You've been contracted to play at my daughter's wedding. He paused, then offered a careful, Lavinia's mother. It's always interesting how the title shifts once you're an obstacle instead of a sponsor. I'm calling with a few questions, I said, about the arrangement, the business kind, not the musical one. I see. There was a rustle, papers being shuffled, possibly a wine glass being moved. Artists are never quite fully dressed in conversation. She requested a quartet, Vivaldi, Bach, something from Bridgerton. I said we don't do Taylor Swift. Wise. She paid the deposit, but the balance is outstanding. How much? 70%, roughly $2,800, and the expectation? That you'd cover the rest, or rather that you'd already done so. I let that sit. 1 beat. 2. Mr. Vargo, I said, tone even. If I'm going to fund Baroque theatrics for a wedding I wasn't invited to, I expect front row seating next to Vivaldi's Ghost. He laughed, not mockingly, but as if appreciating the performance. She didn't mention that you weren't invited. She didn't mention many things. I didn't cancel him. That's not my style. What I did instead was ask one question. If payment isn't made, what happens? He paused again. We don't perform. Do you refund the deposit? No. So you keep the money and she gets silence. Yes. Perfect. I thanked him for his time, wished him an excellent weekend, and said, should things collapse, you'll be hearing from me again. I may have another gig in mind. Smaller audience, sharper acoustics. He chuckled. I'll keep my bow polished. I made 12 more calls that afternoon. The tent installer, the lighting designer, the boutique bakery that specializes in hand-painted macarons themed by season and emotional relevance. Every single vendor had the same structure. Deposit secured. Balance pending. Payment expected from me. I asked the same question each time. What happens if the balance never arrives? They all had different phrasing, but the message was consistent. The lights don't turn on. The chairs don't get set. The cake stays boxed. The violinist doesn't play. I made a note in my ledger. I didn't cancel the orchestra. I just let silence do the talking. That night, I made soup. Leek and potato. The kind Richard used to call recession food, but always went back for seconds. I ate in the living room, wrapped in a shawl my mother gave me before she forgot how to say my name. And I thought about noise. The curated kind Lavinia loved. Instagram applause. Faux surprise parties. Speeches that praised her while she pretended to blush. And I thought about what it would mean on her big day, when the string quartet didn't begin, when guests looked around, waiting for the ceremony to crescendo, and found themselves accompanied by silence. Not chaos, not confrontation, just absence. Deliberate, sharp-edged, and unmissable. Letting things fall is not the same as pushing them, but Lavinia never learned to tell the difference. There's something sacred about good stationery, Not the digital kind. Not an email sent with lowercase greetings and an over-reliance on emojis. I'm speaking of real paper, thick, milled, quiet between the fingers. The kind that absorbs ink like it's keeping a secret. I used the last of my Crane and Company cotton bond, ivory, not cream, for what would be my final piece of correspondence to Lavinia. Not a plea, not a performance, just documentation. I laid the wedding invoice flat on my desk. $84,000, with each line item reading less like celebration and more like a list of financial delusions. Imported peonies in winter, luxury calligraphy menus, a Swarovski-encrusted Unity candle, each detail annotated now with my own pen in red archival ink. Not angry red, academic red, the kind I used to correct graduate theses. Calm, final. On the back, I affixed a note, amended for clarity. Then I opened a fresh sheet and began the letter. Not Dear Lavinia, just her full name. Formal and cold. Lavinia Margot Hollingsworth Grant, Re. Outstanding correspondence, invoice 84K/gift contribution. I am in receipt of your letter dated 3 weeks ago, and the enclosed invoice titled Wedding Contribution, Gift. I acknowledge the intention, if not the delivery. The assumption embedded in your note, that financial provision may stand in for emotional presence, is both familiar and disappointing. Please understand, absence is not an invitation to be taxed. Enclosed is the original document you mailed to me, now annotated for clarity and preservation. You'll find corrections, item by item, with dates of contact I've made to your vendors, questions I've asked regarding their payment structure, and a summary of non-fulfilled balances. This letter serves not as complaint but as record. I paused, sipped my tea, then added, a mother's love is not a line item, and an invoice is not a love letter. You may dress entitlement in silk and seal it with wax. It's still theft. I didn't write the things I could have. I didn't mention the birthdays I organized by hand while working double shifts at the law library, or the fact that she'd once burst into tears over a butterfly that landed on her science fair poster, and how I'd stood guard over it for 15 minutes so she could present with confidence. I didn't remind her of the nights she called at midnight from college, breathless with regret, and I stayed silent on the phone, holding the distance open with my breathing. Those are the details mothers carry. But this letter? This letter was not written by a mother. It was written by a woman who understood contracts. I continued, in semiotic terms, since I know you once tolerated my lectures long enough to earn an A- in undergraduate theory, what you've offered here is a symbolic transfer of obligation, masked as generosity. But Lavinia, a gift, by definition, cannot be demanded. A gift cannot be invoiced. A gift is something given freely, not under threat of familial guilt or social optics. You've mistaken bloodline for budget. You've confused legacy with liability. I folded the letter once, sharply. No soft edges, no emotional curves. I placed it inside a matching envelope, sealed with a wax stamp I hadn't used in years. A small owl. Richard gave it to me on our anniversary. For when words need armor, he'd said. Today felt appropriate. On the outside, I wrote her name in my cleanest cursive. Not loving, not angry, just precise. I added a second sheet of paper. A simple postscript. P.S. Your wedding may proceed with whatever balance remains. This, however, will be my final transaction under the title of Mother. Please amend your records accordingly. I mailed it at 9 a.m. the next morning. No tracking, no signature required. Some things deserve to arrive quietly, like consequence, like truth, like the unspoken grief of watching your child become a creditor. When I returned home, I made a note in my ledger. Letter sent, truth enclosed, love excluded by request. Then I filed a copy of both the letter and the invoice in my cabinet, under personal resolved. Not because it was over, but because I was done carrying it like it wasn't. At precisely 14 days out, the foundation cracked. Not because of me. I had simply declined to pour concrete where there should have been bedrock, but because fantasies, when built on borrowed assumptions, tend to sink all on their own. It started with a florist's assistant, someone named Claudia, judging by the voicemail she accidentally left on my answering machine. She said her mother was covering it. No, still hasn't paid. I don't know, ask Teresa. I'm not calling her again. I already cried once today. Click. No callback number, no apology. Just exhaustion wrapped in baby's breath. I made tea and stared out the window. It was raining. The kind of soft, unremarkable rain that turns wedding lawns into mud without ever making the news. A message followed, this time from the tent rental company. We require full payment 7 business days prior to delivery. Per contract, no exceptions. Simple. Director, sharp as my old grading pen. Then another. Due to outstanding balances, delivery timelines may be affected. Another. Final payment required by end of day to reserve staffing. The caterer emailed a third time. This one addressed to whom it may concern, which I suspect was code for, I'm done pretending this is normal. And finally, the venue. Chateau Virelais, the crown jewel of the fantasy. Their message was less panicked, more ominously professional. Dear Ms. Hollingsworth, as the registered secondary contact on file, we are reaching out to confirm the finalization of payment for the Hollingsworth Grant event, scheduled for the 15th of this month. Per venue policy, all balances must be cleared no later than 10 business days prior to the event. Failure to remit payment will result in forfeiture of deposit and release of reserved space. Please advise. Warmly, Elena Rousseau, venue director. I admired the signature. It was the kind of name one only acquires after managing a dozen billionaire elopements and 1 royal divorce. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Lavinia's personal account, with no subject line and no message. Just the forwarded chain and the growing echo of unpaid promises. By Thursday, word had spread. Vendors talk, especially when they haven't been paid, and especially when the bride forgets that the wedding economy is still a small village. By Friday, the groom's parents had called. Not me. I wouldn't have picked up. But someone had spoken with someone, and by Saturday, I received word through Myra, the florist, who received word through the harpist's cousin's wife, who received word from the venue staff. Gregory's mother was asking questions. Specifically, why were invoices unpaid? Who was responsible? And why hadn't Sybil, the elegant, accomplished, retired professor mother, paid for any of it? Because, dear, I was never invited to the throne room, only billed for the chandelier. I imagined the conversation. Gregory, smoothing his tie. Well, darling, Lavinia said her mother was old money. Clarice, and yes, I've decided her name is Clarice, blinking. Is that the same mother she didn't invite? Pause. Well, yes. Then who is paying for the bloody harpist, Gregory? Turns out, when you plan a royal wedding with peasant funds, the court revolts. And revolts do not begin with riots. They begin with whispers, unanswered emails, unprocessed payments, and quiet questions over champagne no one has paid for yet. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. Instead, I made lemon scones. One must feed the soul while watching the scaffolding come down. I wrapped 2 and dropped them off with Myra. No note. Just the look we shared when transactions come full circle. In the evening, I sat at my desk and added a line to the ledger. Day 14. Still unpaid. Performance unraveling. Principals uninformed. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was confirmation. Proof that the illusion was cracking. Not because I had struck it, but because Lavinia had built it with hollow plaster and assumed no one would tap the walls. The first message came from the florist. Order canceled, no payment received, followed by a polite postscript. Please send someone for the peonies. We're donating them to the hospice unless instructed otherwise. I made a mental note to let them go. Peonies, like certain daughters, thrive on applause and wilt under quiet. The second call was from Myra. Sybil, she said, voice low and amused. Your daughter just screamed the phrase, "You promised cascading orchids," loud enough for 3 delivery drivers to flinch. I never promised anything, I replied. She mistook silence for consent. There was a pause. I told her you weren't responsible, that if she wanted floral drama, she could repurpose the emotional wreckage. And did she like that suggestion? She threw a vase. Good, She's starting to engage with metaphor. By noon, the bakery had pulled out. The tasting fee had cleared, but not the balance for the 7-tier cake inspired by the ceiling fresco of a Venetian cathedral. The chef, a man named Pierre with a website full of testimonials and truffle foam, canceled his menu. "Apologies," he wrote, "but my kitchen does not work on the basis of assumed generosity." A rare moment when I agreed with both syntax and sentiment. Still no word from Lavinia, no call, no email, no half-hearted voice memo recorded between tantrums. Just quiet unraveling, no dress delivery confirmation, no hairstylist travel arrangements, no final headcount filed with the venue. It was as if the wedding had become a ghost, visible only in receipts and regret. I made tea, Darjeeling, no sugar. I drank it by the window, watching a squirrel make more long-term preparations than my daughter had. The violinist messaged next. Still no payment. Should I block the date for another client? I replied with 2 words. Play elsewhere. He liked the message. An emoji popped up. A violin. We live in strange times. I didn't gloat. That's the thing people never understand about dignity. It doesn't require a spotlight to feel victorious. I simply made soup. Butternut squash, with a hint of smoked paprika. I played Debussy on my old record player. Not for the irony, just because the silence needed a frame. The dressmaker's assistant sent a text. Unable to release gown without final payment. Client unresponsive, moving to waitlist queue. The sentence was sharp, merciful, final. A daughter who wanted to ascend the aisle looking like a minor deity would now be lucky to walk it at all. The real beauty was that I had done absolutely nothing. No phone calls to sabotage, no internet smear campaigns, no vengeful emails to guess with attachments labeled truth. Just absence. Calm, clean, surgical absence. Richard once told me the difference between chaos and consequence is intention. Chaos is loud, he said, but consequence just waits at the door. It knocks once. I hadn't knocked. I'd simply refused to open the vault when asked. At 6:32 p.m., Lavinia finally called. I let it ring. Then watched the notification disappear, like a spoiled spell dissolving mid-incantation. No voicemail. Of course not. Voicemail leaves a trail, and my daughter prefers revisionist history over recorded honesty. I sat at my desk and opened my ledger, a final entry in clean block letters. No chef, no gown, no apology, no regrets. And then beneath, in cursive, I didn't ruin her wedding. I just let reality RSVP. That night, I slept with the window open. The autumn air curled into the room like a benediction. No ceremony, no chaos, just consequence. Finally seated at the table where love had once dined alone. The final message came at 3:41 a.m. Not a letter, not a call, not even a voicemail. Lavinia was never one for voices unless there was an audience. Just a text, plain, blunt. You've humiliated me. No punctuation, just 7 words and the unmistakable scent of wounded pride. I stared at it over black coffee, brewed before dawn like I'd always done before oral arguments and funerals. Both required clarity. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because what I had said was already written, printed, and sealed in legal ink. A letter, annotated, footnoted where necessary. Polite in tone but armed with evidence. Receipts, voicemails, emails, and of course the original invoice, the one marked gift in the memo line. I had titled the folder, Maternally Exploited Funds, Exhibit A. It wasn't vindictive, it was just accurate. I made a single copy, heavy stock paper, no staples, just a brass fastener through the top corner, like a dissertation on audacity. Then I filed it under H, for Hollingsworth. Subsection, Lavinia. Tag, financial malfeasance disguised as affection. Richard would have admired the precision. He always said nothing cleans faster than truth and proper indexing. By noon, I had returned to my regular life. I rearranged the books in the study, semiotics on the left, jurisprudence on the right. I re-oiled the window frames, swept the porch, deleted the florist's invoice archive with one final note. Balance, $0. Closure, absolute. Lavinia didn't call again. Of course not. There is no voicemail box brave enough to hold the echo of your own conscience. In the coming weeks, whispers would circulate that the wedding had been rescheduled, that there were creative differences with the vendors, that Clarice, I still refused to call her anything else, had to step in last minute. But no one would mention the truth, that a daughter tried to exile her mother from both the guest list and the ledger, and failed on both counts. My neighbors never asked what happened. They simply waved as I passed. And I waved back, calm, unreadable, serene. There's a quiet dignity in being underestimated, especially when you've spent a lifetime mastering the art of restraint. One morning, I walked to the garden and clipped a single white rose. Then I placed it beside Richard's photograph. He would have understood. He always did. I opened my journal and wrote, "Some invitations are not withheld out of cruelty, but out of fear." She feared what I would say, so she excluded me. But I wasn't excluded. I was excused from financing my own erasure. And then I closed the book, filed it beside the rest. One more quiet entry in a life defined not by drama, but by the refusal to subsidize it. They'll say I overreacted. They'll say I should have let it go, or been the bigger person, or understood how stressful weddings can be. But I was not a person. I was a purse, a silent funder, a living, breathing checkbook who happened to have birthed the bride. And while some may call that tradition, I call it generational fraud, normalized through lace and buttercream. Lavinia didn't forget to invite me. She omitted me, strategically, deliberately, with the same quiet precision she used to list every single vendor's bank details in the invoice marked gift. She didn't ask for help. She assumed it. That's not love. That's inheritance by emotional manipulation. And I've buried enough dignity in this life. I wasn't about to mortgage what little remained just to finance her public fairy tale. There is a moment, not loud, not grand, when a mother becomes something else entirely in her child's eyes. To Lavinia, I became optional, no longer a source of comfort or guidance, but merely a source. She wanted my legacy, not my presence, my money, not my name, my silence, not my voice. Well, she got my silence, but she also got my ledger. Some might call this petty, but let me assure you, pettiness is reactive. What I did was preventive. There's a world of difference between revenge and refusal. I didn't ruin her wedding. I simply refused to pay for my own replacement. If you've ever sat at a kitchen table and stared at a bill for a party you weren't invited to, if you've ever received a letter from someone who claims to love you but addresses you like a donor, if you've ever been told you're overreacting by the very people who made your underreaction a habit, then you know, there comes a time when silence isn't noble. It's erasure. I have spent decades being reasonable, measured, polite. I've kept the peace in rooms that didn't deserve peace. I've folded my pain into pleats and worn it like a pressed blouse. But grief teaches you one thing, especially the kind that lingers for 19 years. You do not owe your absence to people who demand your presence only when it suits them. In the quiet aftermath, I've learned something else. Weddings aren't just about beginnings. They are diagnostic. They reveal who people think you are and what role they believe you still play. And when Lavinia looked at me and saw an ATM with a spine, she learned the hard way that my spine was not for sale. There was no confrontation, no public blow-up, no viral takedown, just red ink and receipts and the slow, methodical return of my boundaries. I've always said that wisdom is not knowing what to say. It's knowing when it no longer needs to be said. So no, I didn't send her a message back. I printed my own, one that will live longer than any bouquet or rented tuxedo. It's filed, stamped, dated, and it ends with my full name, the one she forgot to use, Dr. Sybil Marin Hollingsworth. I was never excluded. I was excused from financing my own erasure, from applauding my own absence, from underwriting a fantasy that treated my existence as an inconvenience. And now, as the roses bloom again and the house is quiet, I feel no bitterness, only breath, and the simple, unshakable knowledge that I may not have walked her down the aisle, but I walked myself back to the truth.